Hello, and welcome back to Transformations of the Global System. I am Dr. Nicole Warmington Granston, and today we'll be looking at foreign policy. Now, basically, what we'll be explaining in this discussion is what foreign policy is, how states make foreign policy decisions. We look at the tools that states use internationally and how different theories explain foreign policy behavior. So we'll find that today's discussion on foreign policy will examine power, decision making, national interest, and the influence of domestic and international factors. So first, I'm going to define some of the key terms because in international relations and and global politics, you may hear us talk about the state, government, nation state, nation. We've seen where some scholars use them interchangeably, but I just want to give a breakdown of the slight differences between the four. So when we define the state, it's actually considered to be a political entity with sovereignty. Government is the leadership that runs the state. The nation is a group sharing identity and culture. And the nation state is a state where the national identity and cultural borders align. Right? So, again, when we're looking at international relations, we may often talk about largely the state or the nation state because, especially if you're a realist, it is this entity that makes and conducts foreign policy. Now, what is foreign policy? Now, foreign policy refers to the strategies and actions a state uses to achieve its goals in international relations. The main goals that states pursue when conducting foreign policy are to protect national interests, promote economic interests, maintain political influence, and also discuss, as we'd say, defend national values and identities, right? So when we look at it, foreign policy is basically how governments interact with the outside world. Now, what are some of the main foreign policy tools? There are two main tools. You can talk about hard power and we can talk about soft power. When we talk about hard power, it's really what we call the carrots and sticks discussion, right? So when we talk about this carrots and sticks, we would say that hard power essentially looks at the use of military or economic force to influence other states. Examples of this would be military intervention, sanctions, threats, and even coercion. Right? So you find that hard power relies on pressure and force in influencing other states. Soft power, on the other hand, deals more with what we'd call issues of diplomacy. It really has three sources, right? But when we talk about soft power, it's the ability to influence others through attraction rather than force. And the main thinker behind this perspective is Joseph Nye, and the sources of soft power tends to be culture, diplomacy, political values, the media, and education. So, for example, we'd see how Hollywood movies can have an influence or soft power influence on other states. The use of international aid, right? And even cultural diplomacy are some of the major ways in which we use soft power. So, when we look at it, states can gain influence without using military action. It should be argued, we should argue, or should understand, I should say, that foreign policy, when it comes to decision making on foreign policy, is that it's not always rational or straightforward. There's actually two major ways in which you can look at this decision making process. It's either through the ideal rational process or what actually happens in policy making. Now, the ideal rational model, in theory, states that policymakers will gather accurate information, define national interest clearly, analyze all possible options, choose the best policy, as well as implement and evaluate decisions carefully. However, we know in reality that information is incomplete, that political bargain occurs, organizations compete with each other, and that decisions are often imperfect. So when we look at it, if you're looking at it from the ideal rational process or what really happens, that foreign policy decisions tend to be influenced by personal motivations, the bureaucracy, media pressure, and political compromise. So we understand that foreign policy is messy and influenced by many actors. It should also be noted that there's different levels of analysis when trying to explain foreign policy. That is, who has influence and how. At the individual level, we find that we focus on leaders and decision makers. And the factors that influence this are personality, beliefs, emotions, and leadership style. Some examples of how we would see the individual affecting politics was Winston Churchill and even Adolf Hitler. How it is that the decisions that they made domestically and the alliances that they made helped to affect how they related to other countries, and how we saw World War II ending. So we know that leadership personalities can actually shape international outcomes. Then at the state level, this would tend to focus on domestic politics within states. And the factors that influence foreign policy at this level are the type of political system, the bureaucracies, public opinion, interest groups, and economic conditions. So we know that domestic politics strongly affects the foreign policy choices. Then we have the system level of analysis, where we look at what is happening in the international environment. So what's the balance of power? What are the alliances? Are there any global threats? Is there international anarchy? So you find that if you're looking at it from the realist perspective, you'd find that states will respond mainly to external pressures. Now, there's actually four major phrases, or should I say phases, in the foreign policy process. The first is that of problem recognition. It's at this stage we find that the state will identify an issue or a threat. The second phase would be that of policy formulation. The state would look at possible responses that would develop in response to an issue or a threat. The third would be the decision-making phase, where leaders will select a course of action. And the fourth phase will be that of implementation and evaluation. At this level, this is where we look at how the policy is carried out. And once it is carried out, it will be assessed and, if possible, modified or eliminated based on the outcome of that foreign policy. We should also go back and note that, as we said before, there are other groups competing in trying to influence foreign policy. So I'll talk a little bit about the organizational and bureaucratic politics that can affect foreign policy. So we know that the main idea here is that government agencies will compete for influence. And the main actors in this respect would be foreign ministries, military organizations, intelligence agencies, and even economic departments. You will find that different agencies may have conflicting goals, but as a result, we know that foreign policy will therefore be a result of compromise among these different institutions. In addition, we know that foreign policy is also driven by national interest. So when we talk about national interest, this basically looks at the goals and priorities that a state seeks to protect internationally. Some of the common national interests that a state has is their security, economic growth, stability, and international prestige. Now, there's a major debate that we state that national interest may be objective and fixed, or you may find that it's sometimes actually also shaped by leaders and ideology. We also know that geography and size can have a major impact on foreign policy. So it should be noted that a country's size and geography will influence their foreign policy behavior. Some important factors that help to shape this are natural resources, population size, its location, access to oceans, and even military capabilities. So for instance, if you're a great power, you'd find that great power countries tend to be the ones that are leading in all policy sectors internationally. They tend to shape where the waves of global politics tend to go. And if you're taking it from a realist point of view, if you're larger, you're all about survival and trying to protect any kind of security dilemma. If, for instance, you are a small country, right, you'd find that you work best in regional and international organizations, that you know that you have limited resources, so you'll focus mainly on economic and trade issues. So they tend to focus more on their geographic region and try to look out for the interest of their own citizens. And then, of course, you may have some resource rich countries or medium sized countries that sometimes operate very similarly, that they all want to kind of maintain the status quo, that they are all about ensuring that they facilitate certain things, they manage how things happen at the global level. So they tend to be more virtuous and have, try to provide what we call the image of being moral global leaders. So this is what you may find with some of these medium-sized countries and how they tend to try to influence their foreign policy. Now, there's actually said to be some foreign policy traditions. And I'll give an example of even our own country when it comes to our foreign policy traditions. So in the United States, we've actually seen where we have been, driven to have long-term foreign policy traditions that include times where we've been isolationists, that we stay out of global politics, times when we've been interventionists, as we've seen during the period of World War II until recently. Then we tend to promote democracy. That's a major long-term foreign policy tradition of ours. And we focus on containment during the Cold War, trying not to ensure that nuclear power went beyond those that already had it, and tried to slow the arms race between the USSR and the United States. We should also know that foreign policy, depending on your theoretical perspective, will determine how it's shaped and what kind of influence it would have. If you're taking it from the liberal perspective, their argument is that foreign policy is strongly influenced by domestic politics. They note that the key influences will be public opinion, bureaucracy, interest groups, and institutions. So from the liberal perspective, they believe that cooperation and diplomacy are important. Then from the realist school, their main argument is that states will act rationally to maximize power and security. The key assumptions that they have are that states are unitary actors, that international pressures shape behavior, and survival is the top priority. So they will tend to emphasize external threats and competition. The Marxist perspective, on the other hand, reflects on capitalist economic interests. The key idea from the school is that political decisions serve economic elites and capitalist structures. And they believe that states have limited freedom because capitalism shapes decisions. So when we compare these perspectives once again, we see that liberalism, the main focus is domestic politics and institutions. Realism is on power and the international system, and Marxism is on capitalism and economic elites. So we see where these different theories explain foreign policy in different ways. Now, there's actually some challenges to foreign policy. And the common challenges that are faced in foreign policy are uncertainty, limited information, conflicting interest, bureaucratic competition, as well as unexpected consequences. So we know that foreign policy decisions are rarely perfect or predictable. So some key terms I wanted to remember before we close is that of foreign policy, national interest, hard power, soft power, the rational model, bureaucratic politics, levels of analysis, diplomacy, sovereignty, containment, and isolationism. So the key takeaways for today is that foreign policy is how states pursue national interests internationally. Decision making is influenced by leaders, institutions, and global pressures, and different theories explain foreign policy behavior differently. So, to close, foreign policy reflects the complex interaction between national interests, political leadership, domestic pressures, and the international environment. Thank you.